Have you ever made a decision that felt perfectly rational at the time, only to look back and wonder, what was I thinking? Whether it's a career move, a financial investment, or something as simple as what to order for lunch, we often act in ways that, in hindsight, seem baffling. Why does this happen? It's not because we're incapable of logic or reasoning. Instead, it's because our brains are hardwired with certain biases, mental shortcuts that help us process information, but often lead us astray. Rolf Dobelli's The Art of Thinking clearly offers a solution. In this book, Dobelli uncovers the 99 cognitive biases that cloud our judgment, explaining how they influence our decisions and, more importantly, how to avoid them. Whether you're an entrepreneur looking to improve your decision-making, someone striving for personal growth, or simply curious about how to think more clearly, this book is a powerful tool for making smarter choices in all aspects of life. So how do we free ourselves from these invisible traps? Stay with me as we explore how you can reclaim control over your decisions by understanding the biases that secretly shape your thinking. Introduction. Rolf Dobelli isn't just a writer. He's a successful entrepreneur with years of experience in business. His work is steeped in insights from psychology, behavioral economics, and practical experience. In The Art of Thinking Clearly, Dobelli introduces us to a world where our thinking is constantly undermined by mental shortcuts, or heuristics. These shortcuts help us make quick decisions, but often lead us into traps, called cognitive biases, that distort reality. The book is structured into 99 concise chapters, each one dissecting a different bias. These biases impact everything from small decisions, like what coffee to order, to life-changing ones, such as which career path to take or whether to invest in a new business venture. The key message of the book is clear. By understanding these biases, you can learn to outsmart them, and in doing so, make better, clearer decisions. Now let's dive deeper into the most impactful cognitive biases Dobelli covers, examining them through the lens of personal development, business, and even health. Chapter by chapter summary. 1. Survivorship Bias. Imagine this. You're watching a documentary about a famous entrepreneur who built a billion-dollar company from scratch. It's inspiring. This person defied all odds, dropped out of college, and still became a massive success. You think to yourself, if they did it, I can too. But what if I told you that for every successful entrepreneur, there are hundreds, maybe thousands, who tried the same thing and failed? This is survivorship bias at work. Survivorship bias occurs when we focus only on the successes, on the survivors, and ignore the failures. In the business world, this can create a dangerous illusion. We look at the successful companies like Amazon, Apple, or Google and think that by following their path, we can achieve the same results. But we rarely hear about the countless startups that followed the same strategies and still failed. A great example of survivorship bias can be seen in the stock market. Investors often look at the top-performing stocks, such as Tesla or Microsoft, and think, if only I had invested in them early on, I'd be rich now. But this ignores all the other companies that launched around the same time and went bankrupt. By focusing solely on the winners, we develop an incomplete and overly optimistic view of reality. Survivorship bias doesn't only apply to the business world, it impacts our personal lives too. Think about fitness influencers on social media. We see people with perfect physiques and assume that by following their workout routines and diets, we'll look the same. But what we don't see are the genetic advantages, the failed attempts, and the behind-the-scenes struggles. Survivorship bias pushes us to focus on the success stories while ignoring the many who didn't make it. Dobelli's advice? When studying success, always ask yourself, what are the failures I'm not seeing? Only by considering both the winners and the losers can you get a realistic understanding of what it takes to succeed. 2. Swimmer's body. Illusion. Picture this. You're at the gym, and the personal trainer guiding you is in peak physical condition. You think, if I follow their training regimen, I'll look just like them. But what if their success isn't just due to their workout plan, but also to genetic factors. This is the swimmer's body illusion, a common cognitive trap where we confuse selection criteria with outcomes. The swimmer's body illusion is named after professional swimmers. We see their athletic bodies and assume that swimming has shaped them, but in reality, they were likely selected for the sport because they already had the ideal body type for it. The same logic applies to many fields. People often think that attending an elite university guarantees success, but those schools typically admit students who are already predisposed to succeed. This bias is pervasive in both the health and business sectors. In fitness, we follow workout programs and diets from top athletes, expecting similar results, even though genetics play a significant role. In business, we might follow the strategies of successful entrepreneurs, forgetting that their natural talents and unique circumstances played a key role in their success. The key to avoiding this bias is to recognize when we're attributing success to the wrong factors. Success often requires a combination of natural ability, effort, and luck, and not everyone starts with the same advantages. By acknowledging this, we can set more realistic goals and avoid the frustration that comes from comparing ourselves to others with different starting points. 3. Clustering. Illusion. Imagine flipping a coin 5 times in a row and getting heads every time. It feels like there's a pattern emerging, right? Maybe the coin is rigged? This is the clustering illusion, our tendency to see patterns in random events. Our brains are wired to seek out patterns because it helps us make sense of the world. In many situations, this instinct is helpful, but when it comes to randomness, it can lead us astray. The clustering illusion occurs when we perceive connections between events that are actually independent of each other. This bias often shows up in the stock market, where investors might see a short-term upward trend in a stock and assume it will continue rising. But in reality, the fluctuations might be completely random. Investors who act on perceived patterns rather than actual data often end up making poor decisions. The clustering illusion also affects our personal lives. Let's say you've had a series of bad days at work. You might start to believe that your job is cursed, even though those bad days could just be a random occurrence. This bias tricks us into seeing meaning where none exists. To avoid falling into the clustering illusion, Dobelli suggests we question the patterns we see. Are these events truly connected, or could they be random? By recognizing randomness for what it is, we can avoid making decisions based on faulty assumptions. 4. Social proof. Have you ever walked into a restaurant and noticed that one side is packed with people while the other side is empty? You naturally gravitate toward the busy side, assuming the food must be better there. This is the power of social proof, the tendency to follow the crowd, assuming that if everyone else is doing something, it must be the right thing to do. Social proof is a powerful influence on our behavior because it taps into our desire to fit in with others. It's an evolutionary trait that helped our ancestors survive by sticking with the group. But in the modern world, social proof can lead us astray. One classic example of social proof can be seen in financial markets. During the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s, investors rushed to buy tech stocks simply because everyone else was doing it. They assumed that because others were investing, it must be a good idea. When the bubble burst, many of those investors lost everything. In our personal lives, social proof can lead us to follow trends that don't align with our values. We might pursue careers, relationships, or lifestyles simply because they're popular, without considering whether they're truly right for us. For instance, social media often amplifies trends in health and wellness, leading people to try diets or exercise programs that aren't suitable for them, just because everyone else seems to be doing it. To avoid the social proof trap, Dobelli advises us to think critically about the choices we make. Are we following the crowd because it's the right decision for us, or simply because we don't want to stand out? By evaluating our decisions independently, we can avoid being swayed by the actions of others. 5. Availability. Bias. Let's say you're trying to decide whether to fly or drive on your next vacation. You've just seen a news report about a plane crash, and now flying seems like a much riskier option than driving. This is the availability bias. our tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events based on how easily we can recall examples. The availability bias occurs because our brains are more likely to remember vivid, emotionally charged events. This can lead us to make decisions that aren't grounded in reality. In the case of flying versus driving, the data clearly shows that flying is much safer than driving, but the vivid image of a plane crash sticks in your mind, making you think otherwise. This bias affects decision-making in both personal and professional contexts. In business, executives might overreact to recent high-profile failures, making overly cautious decisions out of fear of repeating those mistakes. For example, a company might cancel a new product launch after seeing a competitor's failure, even though the market conditions might be different. In personal health, the availability bias can lead us to worry about rare diseases or accidents, while ignoring more common health risks. For instance, after hearing about a rare but dramatic health issue, you might become fixated on preventing it, while neglecting more pressing health concerns like heart disease or diabetes. To counter the availability bias, Dobelli suggests relying on data rather than anecdotal evidence. When making decisions, ask yourself, what does the actual data say about the risks? By grounding your choices in facts, you can avoid being swayed by emotionally charged but statistically unlikely events. 6. Confirmation bias. Imagine you have a strong opinion on a controversial topic, say climate change or politics. As you browse the internet, you gravitate toward articles and videos that support your viewpoint, while ignoring anything that contradicts it. This is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that challenges them. Confirmation bias is one of the most common and dangerous cognitive biases. It narrows our perspective and reinforces our existing beliefs, making it difficult for us to consider alternative viewpoints or change our minds. In business, confirmation bias can lead to poor decision-making. For example, a CEO might be so convinced that a new product will succeed that they ignore market research suggesting otherwise. In personal relationships, confirmation bias can lead to misunderstandings. For instance, if you believe that your partner is untrustworthy, you might interpret their actions in ways that confirm that belief, even if they're acting innocently. One of the most famous examples of confirmation bias occurred in the scientific community. For years, scientists believed that ulcers were caused by stress and spicy foods. When two Australian researchers, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, suggested that ulcers were actually caused by bacteria, their findings were dismissed. It wasn't until years later, after conducting a groundbreaking study, that the medical community accepted their research, and the two were awarded the Nobel Prize. Dobelli advises us to actively seek out opposing viewpoints and challenge our own beliefs. Surround yourself with people who think differently and be open to changing your mind when presented with new evidence. By recognizing and overcoming confirmation bias, you can make more balanced, informed decisions. 7. Anchoring effect. Imagine you're negotiating the price of a new car. The seller starts by asking for $30,000. Even though you know the car is worth less, that initial number becomes your reference point, or anchor, for the entire negotiation. This is the anchoring effect, a cognitive bias that causes us to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive, even when it's irrelevant or misleading. The anchoring effect can have a powerful influence on decision-making, especially in negotiations. In business, the first offer made during a negotiation often sets the tone for the rest of the discussion, even if it's far from the actual market value. Similarly, in salary negotiations, the first number mentioned can anchor expectations, leading to outcomes that are skewed by the initial offer. A famous example of the anchoring effect can be seen in real estate. When selling a house, real estate agents often set a high initial asking price, knowing that potential buyers will anchor their offers to that number. Even if the house isn't worth that much, the first offer sets the range for subsequent negotiations. To counter the anchoring effect, Dobelli advises us to challenge initial offers or numbers. Don't let the first piece of information you hear dictate your decisions. Always do your own research and base your choices on objective data. By recognizing the power of anchors, you can negotiate more effectively and avoid being swayed by arbitrary numbers. 8. Sunk cost fallacy. You've invested thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours into a project, but it's clear that it's not going to work out. Instead of cutting your losses and moving on, you keep pushing forward, telling yourself, "I've already put so much into this. I can't quit now." This is the sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in something simply because of the resources we've already invested, even when it's no longer worth it. The sunk cost fallacy is a powerful bias that affects both individuals and businesses. In business, companies often continue pouring resources into failing projects simply because they've already spent so much on development. For example, a company might continue funding a product that isn't selling well just because they've already spent millions on marketing and production. In personal life, the sunk cost fallacy can keep us in bad relationships, jobs, or hobbies that no longer bring us joy, simply because we don't want to feel like we've wasted our time. For instance, you might stay in a relationship that's no longer fulfilling just because you've been together for years. A famous example of the sunk cost fallacy occurred during the Vietnam War. Despite mounting evidence that the war was unwinnable, the U.S. government continued to escalate its involvement, partly because of the vast resources that had already been invested. The desire to avoid admitting failure led to continued investment in a losing battle. Dobelli's advice? Let go of the past and focus on the future. When making decisions, ask yourself, what's the best course of action moving forward? Don't let sunk costs dictate your future choices. By recognizing and overcoming this bias, you can make more rational decisions that are based on the present reality, not on what you've already invested. 9. Endowment Effect. You're selling an old piece of furniture that's been in your family for years. A buyer offers you a fair price, but you hesitate. Surely it's worth more than that. This is the endowment effect, a bias that causes us to overvalue things simply because we own them. The endowment effect can lead to irrational decisions in both business and personal life. For example, an entrepreneur might hold on to a failing product because they've invested so much time and effort into it, even though it's no longer profitable. In personal life, we might refuse to sell or give away possessions that we no longer need, simply because they hold sentimental value. One famous example of the endowment effect occurred during the dot-com bubble. Many investors refused to sell their tech stocks, even as the market began to crash, because they had become emotionally attached to their investments. They overvalued their holdings simply because they owned them, leading to massive losses when the bubble burst. To overcome the endowment effect, Dobelli advises us to view our possessions and our decisions objectively. Just because something is ours doesn't mean it's worth more than what the market says. By recognizing the endowment effect, we can make more rational decisions about when to hold on and when to let go. 10. Contrast effect. You're shopping for a new laptop. The first one you see is a high-end model priced at $2,000. The next one is a mid-range model priced at $1,200. Suddenly, the $1,200 laptop seems like a bargain, even though it's still more than you wanted to spend. This is the contrast effect, a bias that causes us to judge things in relation to others, rather than on their own merits. The contrast effect is a powerful tool used in marketing and sales. By placing high-priced items next to lower-priced ones, companies can make the lower-priced items seem like a better deal, even if they're still expensive. This bias affects our perception of value, making us more likely to choose options that seem favorable in comparison to others. In negotiations, the contrast effect can be used to influence decisions. For example, if a seller initially shows a high-priced product, they can make the next option seem more appealing by comparison, even if it's still more expensive than you planned to spend. To avoid falling into the contrast effect, Dobelli advises us to evaluate things based on their intrinsic value, not how they compare to other options. By focusing on the true value of something, rather than how it stacks up against other choices, we can make more informed, objective decisions. Key insights. Now that we've explored some of the key biases Dobelli discusses, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What are the main takeaways from the art of thinking clearly? 1. Cognitive biases. Affect everyone. No one is immune to cognitive biases, not even the most rational, well-informed thinkers. The first step to thinking clearly is recognizing that our brains are wired to make shortcuts that often lead us astray. Dobelli emphasizes that we can't completely eliminate these biases, but by becoming more aware of them, we can reduce their impact on our decisions. 2. Better decision-making in business. For entrepreneurs and business leaders, understanding cognitive biases is crucial to making better decisions. Whether you're negotiating a deal, evaluating an investment, or developing a strategy, biases like anchoring, sunk costs, and confirmation bias can lead you astray. By identifying these biases, you can make more informed, rational choices that are based on objective facts, not distorted perceptions. 3. Emotional versus rational thinking. A recurring theme throughout the book is the tension between emotional and rational thinking. Many of the biases Dobelli discusses arise because our emotions interfere with our ability to think logically. The key to clear thinking is learning to separate emotion from reason and to question our gut reactions. This is particularly important in high-stakes situations, such as business decisions, health choices, and personal relationships. 4. Practical application. Dobelli's insights are not just theoretical, they're highly practical. By applying the lessons in this book to your everyday life, you can start making better decisions immediately. Whether it's resisting the temptation to follow the crowd, social proof, avoiding the sunk cost fallacy, or being mindful of how anchoring affects negotiations, Dobelli provides concrete examples of how to apply these concepts in real-life situations. 5. Continuous learning. Finally, Dobelli encourages us to never stop learning. Cognitive biases are deeply ingrained in our thinking, and it takes constant effort to overcome them. By continuously educating ourselves about these mental traps and practicing critical thinking, we can improve our decision-making over time. Why this book is useful. So, why is the art of thinking clearly so valuable? For anyone interested in personal development, entrepreneurship, or even health, this book provides an essential toolkit for thinking more clearly and avoiding costly mistakes. Entrepreneurs can use these insights to make smarter business decisions, investors can avoid falling into cognitive traps that lead to poor financial choices, and individuals can improve their personal relationships and health by making more rational, well-informed decisions. Ultimately, the art of thinking clearly teaches us to slow down, question our assumptions, and think critically about the decisions we make every day. By recognizing and avoiding cognitive biases, we can improve our judgment, make better choices, and live more fulfilling, successful lives.